Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kamil Can Akramov. I'm a senior research fellow at the International Football Research Institute based in Washington, D.C. And welcome to today's webinar. Uh, as you may know, this webinar series are organized jointly uh, with the IFPRI, University of Westminster, London, and our host, Westminster International University in Tashkent. Today, we have a lucky to have Dr. Patrick Gaule from University of Bath in UK. Patrick is an applied macroeconomist who works at the intersection of labor economics and the economics of science and innovation. She is a senior lecturer at the University of Bath. He holds PhD from the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland. And Patrick was postdoctoral research fellow at the MIT Sloan School of Management, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and at Harvard University. Today, Patrick will talk about US immigration policy and its impact on advancement of global science and innovation. And this paper was published just a few months ago as IMF working paper. And our discussant today from University of Westminster, London, Business School, Karen Jackson. So Patrick, you will have up to 40 minutes for presentation. Then Karen will have up to 8-10 minutes for discussion. Then we will have some time for Q&A. With now, I'd like to invite Patrick to start his presentation. Patrick, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on your seminar series. I used to be based at CRGI in Prague, where our mission was to train PhD students from Central Eastern Europe, as well as former Soviet countries in general. And we had some students from Uzbekistan, including from this school in particular. So anyway, I've been interested in the region for a while, and I met some people from there. I hope to visit someday. Now, for this paper, I'm going to talk about immigration innovation and joint work with Gaule, Ina Ganguly, and Jeff Smith. So this paper is part of a broader research agenda on what I call the economics of lost talent. And the idea is that you have some particularly talented individuals who don't have the chance to develop their potential. Then this may be bad not just for these individuals, but for the whole or for society at large. I have a first paper on that topic, more or less on that topic that was published last year. And the one I'll present today is kind of a follow-on on that earlier paper. So in the media, there's been quite a bit of attention to the fact that several of the key people behind the COVID-19 vaccines were immigrants. For instance, on the right, Katalin Karikó was an immigrant from Hungary to the US, while on the left you have these, and she's a pioneer in mRNA technology, which underpins the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And then on the left, you have this Turkish couple that founded BioNTech, and they were a key force behind the development of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccines. Now, if these people, because they moved to a different country, were able, as a result, to produce better science, then this might have been good not just for them or for Germany or the US, but for the whole world. And with innovation, there's be this public good nature of the thing, but it's not just the people who invent it to benefit, but potentially up to the whole world may benefit from that. So there's a literature out there that looks at the effect of immigration in the US or in host countries more generally. But much less attention has been paid on how immigration affects science and innovation globally. And so that's what we want to tackle in this paper. It's kind of a difficult question to tackle because we'd like to observe both people who stay in their home country and people who move, as well as people who move to different destinations. And we didn't really want to sample on success. So there have been some previous studies on migration of highly cited scientists, but we were more interested in looking at people who had great potential, irrespective of whether they eventually make it. Because if you only look at people who are eventually successful, we may miss some patterns because we don't look at the people who may have become successful if the circumstances were different. So to overcome these challenges, we're going to use the setting of the International Mathematical Olympiad. And this is a competition for high school students where you have talented teenagers from all around the world who come to one central location, having qualified for national competitions, and they solve 6 really difficult mathematics problem. And the problem you see up there, actually, by the standards of the IMO, is considered to be an easy problem. And then the people who do well at the IMO, they receive medals, and we can observe all of that. So in my previous paper, before Shiragawa, we looked at, we found that the number of points scored at the IMO, right? So how well people were able to solve problems in their teenage years was correlated with future achievement in mathematics and how much math knowledge people produce. So in this paper, we are building upon that earlier work. And we're going to use 2 data sets. On one hand, we're going to observe, we have data on medalists at the IMO, and how well they did there. And we're going to match them to their, we know what they did in terms of mathematics publications and sites. We also manually collect data on the current occupations and location. And then this data has some advantages. In particular, we know everybody who participated and got a medal. But he didn't tell us what people would have liked, whether people would have liked to migrate, what their aspirations were, and so on and so forth. So to get information on that, we also have an original survey of approximately 500 recent IMO participants with kind of data on these kind of aspirations that they may have had. So just to give you a preview of the results, we find that there are a few countries, and in particular the US, that are very good at nurturing talent. And we also find that there is a latent demand for migration. Many people who would like to move, but they are unable to do so. And in large part, that's because of financing constraints. So we combine these two things together. Actually, we arrive at the conclusion that reducing barriers to immigration could yield a large increase in the scientific knowledge produced by these very talented people. So I'm going to go a bit deeper into the migration, the nurturing talent aspect of this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the productivity of these medalists, where this is how many math publications or sites they received, or whether they became a speaker at the International Congress of Mathematicians, which is a high honor for mathematics. And we're going to compare migrants and stayers in that dimension, and we're also going to compare migrants to different countries. And we're going to control for the year in which these people participated at VIMO, as well as the countries they represented and the score they got at VIMO. So in general, we find that the migrants are more productive than the stayers, but that's especially the case for migrants to the US. These are Poisson regression. So to interpret the magnitude, I'm taking the exponential here, and the differences are really large. So a migrant to the US is 4 times as productive as a stayer, while a migrant to the UK is only twice as productive as a stayer. So that's what I mean by some countries are, but the US is particularly good, it seems like, at nurturing talent. An alternative way to look at these results, here I'm including country of origin fixed effects in the regression. And here I'm just replacing this country of origin fixed effects by a dummy for being from a developing country. And so IMO medalists who are from a developing country produce less mathematical knowledge, so less likely to become speakers at the International Congress. So these results here were what we had in our AR Insights paper. But now if you look at the coefficient for migrants, it's positive, similar in magnitude, and the opposite side as being from a developing country. So it looks like being from a developing country is associated with penalty in terms of how much knowledge people can produce, but this can be overcome by migrating. So we might have a discussion on the extent to which the productivity differences between stayers and migrants reflects kind of a causal effect of migration, or is more like a selection effect. Okay, so I'd like to argue more for the causal effect, because we're looking here at a sample of people who have similar math talents. They were able to solve the same problems where they were in the teenage years. So we have a control for kind of mathematics ability. Moreover, the selection, if you think about who can move to the US or other countries, the Moscow itself may be a determinant of that selection. I've had a series of discussions with an admission officer at MIT for undergraduate study, and they look really closely at IMO scores and so forth. That's an important factor in the admission. For them, it's much easier to interpret that than to interpret the high school GPA or some other factor. And they also think if somebody can do math very well, they can do basically anything. And so they're more than happy to admit people with strong math background. So because we control for the MO score, we also control for this potential selection on observables. There could still be some selection on observables. So maybe the people who move to the US are particularly motivated or something like that. And that could be correlated with math productivity. We cannot completely rule this out, but we think that's somewhat unlikely because we find these very large sort of effects earlier in the earlier regressions, but would have to be a really large selection of non-observables to explain the differences that we obtain. There are some other studies that have attempted to look at what's the effect of location, either on scientific productivity or on income. Here was an interesting study by Michael Clements, and he looks at the income of IT professionals from India, and they apply for the H-1B lottery, so where some people randomly can move to the US while others can't. And there he finds that being able to move to the US leads to the income of these people going up by a factor of 3, right? While on our side, we find, well, it's not an experiment, but we can control for ability. We find what looks like a large effect of migration on scientific productivity. So we might wonder, what is it about migrating that makes people more productive? And in particular, what is it about migrating to the US that makes people more productive when they are there? And we can have a discussion about that. There are many potential mechanisms at play. To get started, I want to distinguish, and I'm not going to be able to perfectly answer that. However, to get started, I want to distinguish between an intensive and extensive margin. So the intensive margin for us is conditional on being employed in math academia. How productive are you? And if you look at column 2 here, or 4, the migrants to the US are much more productive, both than stayers and than migrants to other countries. So it seems like there's something about being in the US that makes, sorry about that, that makes people more productive, conditional on being on math academia. There's also an extensive margin, which is entering math academia as an occupation. And migrants are more likely to become math professors, but that's not specific to the US. That also happens when people move to other countries. So that's kind of the nurturing talent angle. I also like to talk a bit about the attracting talent angle. So there are many reasons why people may want to move from one country to another, but one that's salient in our setting is that in some countries, not all countries, but in some countries, there is not a very good undergraduate education that's available locally. And to satisfy their thirst for knowledge, these highly talented kids may want to move abroad to kind of satisfy the first for knowledge. And indeed, in our sample, we have a lot of migration. Here I'm showing you the migration network map for the IMO gold medalists, which is a bit easier to read than for all medalists. And you see that the US is attracting these talent flows from basically all around the world, while for a few other smaller hubs that are also attracting talent, such as here you have UK, Germany, Canada, or France. So what I'm showing you here is people actually moving to a different country. But we were also interested in people who might have moved if the circumstances were somewhat different. So in the survey of IMO participants, we asked if you could have studied anywhere for your undergraduate degree, where would you have wanted to study? And in example, we find shockingly, when I first saw this, looking at developing country participants, if they could have studied anywhere on the world, 2/3 said they would have studied in the US, while 15% said they would have studied in the UK. And only around 10% would have wanted to stay in their home country. And we can compare that to where people actually study. So as you see on this graph, so upper two panels are about advanced countries. Let's focus on the lower two. So the bottom right here is what you have seen before in the last slide with slightly different colors. And then on the left, you have the actual allocation. So among developing country IMO participants, already now, you have about 1/4 who is studying in the US for their undergraduate degree. But if you look at the aspirations, right, where all these other people who would like to study in the US, but don't do it, okay? And so we were interested in trying to understand why people cannot study in the US, even though they aspire to do that. And our initial interviews, suggested a quite intuitive explanation, which was financial barriers. So it's not cheap to study in the US or in the UK. There are living costs, there are also tuition costs. Now, few places have financial aid available for international students. So MIT, for instance, they're accepting a number of international students, and if the students are relatively poor, then basically it's all free for the students. In addition, they will receive a stipend for living expenses. However, it's not that many places that actually have this type of financial aid available. So in the survey, we asked people who did not apply to universities, why did they not apply to US universities? And here we have a large share of respondents, especially in developing countries, who report financing costs as a very important reason not to apply to US universities, much more than, for instance, immigration climate, which we also asked about. In the survey, we also have some hypothetical choice questions where we ask people to choose between two college admission offers, and one comes from a higher ranked university and the other one comes from a lower ranked university, but has full financial support. And then when people are choosing between these type of offers, we see that participants from developing countries are much more likely to choose the funded option, of strengthening the the evidence that financing constraints matter. So the title of our paper is Why Does Migration Matter for the Global Advancement of the Paper of Science? And our argument is that it's really about these two things, that on the one hand, migrants appear to be more productive when they move, and on the other hand, there are a lot of people who would like to move but are unable to do so. And therefore, if we could reduce barrier to migrations, then we could get more knowledge produced. And we attempt to quantify that in a back of envelope calculation. And we conduct the following thought experiment. So we're asking how much more knowledge could be produced if everybody could study in their preferred location. And I'll show you the calculation in a minute, but we're going to I have to tell you that we're making two assumptions in that calculation. The first one is that the difference in productivity between stayers and migrants can be interpreted in a causal manner. And then the other one is that we are not considering spillovers and disadvantaged individuals may have on other people. And conceptually, these spillovers could be either positive or negative. So let me talk you through a simplified version first. So currently, around 1/3 of IMO participants migrate, and this would jump to 2/3 if all could study in their preferred location. So in this little infographic here, I've put up 3 mathematicians, and in the current allocations, I have 2 stayers and 1 migrant. Now, if they could all of those who want to move could do so, then we would have 1 stayer and 2 migrants. Now, assuming that the stayers produce 1 papers, we also know that migrants are about twice as productive as stayers. So in the current allocation, our 2 stayers are each producing 1 paper, while we have a migrant producing 2 papers. In the counterfactual allocation, we have one stayer producing 1 paper, but now we have 2 migrants publishing 2 papers each. And so the total production of knowledge, this little example, has gone from 4 papers, 4 to 5 papers, so it's up by 25%. And in the paper, we do a slightly more elaborate version where we also take into account the fact that most people want to go to the US, as our survey shows, and those who go to the US tend to be particularly productive. Then we reach a conclusion that total output could be more than 50% higher. So the output we are talking about here is kind of math output, right? Is math publications and so forth. This is not the only type of knowledge that we care about. I want just to mention that we use mathematics and VIMO as a laboratory to understand some of these issues, but we think the same may be true in other domains, for instance, for talented teenagers who are interested in computer science or other domains, we might find similar patterns there as well. But also within as a sample of IMO participants, these people are math geniuses, but they're also very smart people who can do all sorts of things. For instance, we have 1 person in our sample who is a co-founder of VK and Telegram. So enabling kind of these very talented kind of teenagers to fulfill their potential could be beneficial not just in math, but also in other domains. So what could we do about that, right? So one, and actually, I very much look forward to hearing what you in the audience have to say on this and on the rest of the paper as well. Um, so what we do about that? So one option is to have more scholarships for top talent from especially from developing countries to study abroad. That might be, would that be good for the standing country, right? That's a bit of a matter for debate. There's another thing that could be done, which is to improve the capacity of the standing countries so that if people stay, their talent is nurtured better, right? And so this would imply kind of improving training centers in some source countries, just exactly as your own university basically does, but strengthen these type of places so that if people don't want to move or cannot move, their talent is nurtured better. But thinking more about kind of the scholarships option, then there's a question about how we might go about and pay for that, right? So one issue here is that the people who might benefit most from migrating are the migrants themselves. So in principle, we could imagine a contract where they would pledge future labor income in exchange to capital to finance the human capital accumulation. But we know these contracts are really tricky to set up, especially for these people who then may move on to other countries. And there's also the issue that the spillovers generated by talented individuals could be spread across multiple organizations or countries. So this could be an opportunity for philanthropic investment. Actually, recently we have been approached by a philanthropy advisory group that's interested in finding funding opportunities. I mean, giving opportunities for very rich individuals and foundations who want to make a difference through their philanthropic investment. And the other conclusion of paper on a proposal for scholarships, and they are looking at they're doing a feasibility study to see the extent to which it might be done. Yeah, so that's all for my presentation. But as I said, I very much look forward to your reaction, comments, and so forth, as well as the discussion.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for very interesting and encouraging presentation. And thank you very much for managing your time very well. Actually, you saved a lot for discussion. Now I'd like to invite Karen for her thoughts about the paper and about the topic in general. Please, Karen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the very interesting presentation, and particularly I think such an interesting presentation when I don't think you're feeling very well. So we really appreciate your enthusiasm. So I read this paper with great interest, and I have a number of kind of comments, questions, things we might discuss, but I am mindful that there are already a number of questions in the Q&A, so I don't want to give too much time to my points, so I'll run through them quite quickly. So if I understood correctly, the key findings were fourfold. One, that migrants are very important in the context of this global knowledge network, or how it's defined within the paper. Secondly, that the US migrants are likely to be more productive than those which end up in other countries, other alternative destinations. And thirdly, that in fact, a migration decision depends on financial constraints, which we would expect. And fourth, that we could have these kind of push incentives, as you described them, to sort of essentially promote migration, more migration, and therefore through this promote scientific output, assuming this is positive link. So that was my kind of takeaway from, or my takeaways from the paper. And my comments and questions, I mean, it was interesting because when I initially read the paper, I sort of was looking at the fact that you used your own survey in part of the paper. And my initial thought was, well, can that data be actually incorporated somehow into the empirical framework? Now, the more I've kind of watched your presentation, I suspect that that's probably not the case, but I wonder whether that's an area that you might develop in future, that you might do more of your own kind of survey data, and then it might sort of enrich the findings. So that was my first question. The second is, in the context of the migrant productivity regressions that you do, I guess as a person who's a trade economist, I'm not kind of constantly embedded within this literature, so forgive the kind of basic question, but my question was really about whether there was any role for considering alternative empirical approaches for the purpose of robustness, partly. I realized that I'm guessing just the nature of your question doesn't lead itself to a general equilibrium framework, which seems to be something used quite widely in the literature. But I did just wonder the extent to which, when looking across the literature, whether there's an opportunity to, in fact, adopt an alternative approach just to test the findings. I know you mentioned this at the beginning, and it was perhaps because I hadn't read the paper carefully enough, but can I just check as a third point whether in fact I'm right that you did include people who had not migrated anywhere in the data set? And then fourthly, I wondered whether there was any role for considering any alternative estimators. So whether, for example, it would be appropriate to consider something like a GMM estimation, you know, just as a robustness check. So, and then perhaps my biggest curiosity I leave for last, which was, okay, so the premise is that people are migrating to the US, and the US is nurturing this talent very well, and therefore they perform very well in the scientific community. But I guess I was having a look at obviously what you controlled for, and then some of the discussions through the survey data. And my curiosity was whether some people, in fact, there was a selection bias, that somebody was migrating because they were attracted perhaps through higher wages or the expectation of higher wages. And in a sense, let's say the better, in quotations, or the more qualified individuals, the more likely to succeed, were in fact going to the US because of these wage differentials, and not because in fact the US as a country, as a system, was any better at nurturing these individuals, but simply because they were attracted to this destination for a number of things that might not be controlled for within the modeling at the moment. I mean, I say this from my own perspective because I remember in my childhood it being a really well-established fact that, you know, wages in the US were massively higher than in many places in Europe. And so I'm guessing even if the reality is that there aren't very much higher wages in the scientific community in the US, that might be the perception of individuals when they make the decision of where to study. And I think we've become increasingly aware that the decision where you study is also often linked to the idea of where we might work afterwards, because it can be difficult to study in one location and then move to another to work somewhere else. So I guess I'll leave my comments on that point. Is the US really nurturing the talent, or are they just getting a better selection in the first place?
Patrick, you may respond now to Karen's questions. And
well, thanks a lot for your thoughts. yeah, the key issue is, or maybe the one that, yeah, that should discuss first and is really critical is, are we really getting a causal effect of migration to the US, or it's more like a selection like you allude to? I think one strength for settings that we can control for this math ability in teenage years. So these are people who at teenage years they could solve the same problems. And one is a migrant and one is a stayer, right? And that at least we can control for that. But we cannot completely rule out that there's some selection going on. Ideally, we'd like to have some kind of lottery, right? Some people are randomly can go and not go. There's some literature on migration that has used that, but not really in this type of context that we are what we're looking at. And of course, we have stayers in the data, right? We want to compare migrants to stayers, and that's an advantage of this IMO data is that we observe people as long as they have been to the IMO, irrespective of what happens to them later, the sample, if they move, they stay, and we can use that. And we did this survey, and I think we can learn a lot of stuff from surveys. Just asking people, that's really a great way to learn more about the world, actually. And we use that quite extensively in the paper. But we also like to complement that something that's not survey-based, because we have to deal with the issue that not everybody is answering, so we have to worry a bit about that. Yeah, and then we could have, we certainly have different estimations. I think a general approach is kind of a different paper. I'm not sure I want to go there. But,
Thank you, Patrick. And we have several questions from our participants. And I also have a couple of questions. First, probably you have seen the paper by Bentley, MacLeod, and Miguel Urgiola. They just published a paper in Journal of Economic Perspectives about why the United States has the best research universities. And that's
I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah, that's very relevant paper for your topic. And they argue in that paper that because US universities have very unique and best framework to attract talent and also to nurture talent, they have this best research universities, and they start from after the Civil War, Cornell and I think John Hopkins. Yeah, they came up with this the formula and also tenureship in the university professors, and so those kind of innovations at the time created the base for U.S. universities to be leaders in the world in terms of research, not only in mathematics, but in other areas as well. So what's your take on this actually, this kind of argument? That's a first question. And the second question is about, so when people migrate to US or to UK, and they have actually, of course, better living conditions, better pay, and so on. But when people stay at their host country, so they have very different living conditions, very different pay scale, and instead of doing just their research, focusing on their, the area of research, they have to do many other things just to survive. So how this may have impact in the outcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for your very relevant comments. So for the second point, well, this could be exactly what's going on, right? But if you stay, if you're a math professor in Uzbekistan or Indonesia, you have to teach a lot more than in the US, or you have to find some complementary income, and so you have less time and energy, right, for mathematics, right? So this could be partly what explains the difference, right? And then your point about the US universities, yeah, we should look at that paper more closely. Uh, yeah, my guess also is that, but I have to check this a bit more, and I think that's related to the argument also, is that in US universities, you also have quite a bit of dispersion in wages and this type of things, right? And you have the tenure system. So you have lots of incentives on people to produce and so forth, right? And even in other countries, even like even in UK actually, the incentives may not be as strong, right? So that could be one potential explanation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And let me just to read some questions from the participants. And Iqbal Jan Sabirov is asking, how can IMO represent talent? It is only maths and only Olympiad game. What do you say to this question?
Yeah, of course, we don't claim to have a universal measure of talent. People can be talented in many different things and so forth, right? However, if we think about mathematics, which is one particular domain, right, then we actually see that the score at the IMO is correlated with these future outcomes that these people have. And in the first paper, we also looked at if it could be a causal effect, that you get a medal and you get this prestige, you get into better school, and so it's just a kind of a snowball effect there, and we didn't find evidence for that. So it's not a perfect measure of talent. It's only one domain, but it is kind of strongly predictive of some future outcomes, at least within the math domain. So that's why we kind of use that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And Bilal Buzurukov is asking very interesting questions about your regression outcomes. And so first question he's asking is, he says, why did you particularly choose a Poisson model? Is it because of the nature of your data, being count data? If yes, have you also considered other count models such as negative binomial and zero inflated model? And second question is, okay, he's asking here, in your regression model, I have not seen any control variables which could control for bias caused by home and destination country structural differences. How did you address this issue? Please, Patrick, these two questions from Bilal Buzurukov.
Yeah. So for the model, we use a Poisson. That's many people kind of do that. We can certainly do a negative binomial or zero inflated Poisson, but the magnitudes of the effect we get is so large that it's not going to matter much exactly which models we're going to run. So I don't think that we can do different things, but I don't think it matters much for what we get in terms of results. And then these home or destination country structural differences. Well, that's what we want to control for, but what's the effect we're interested in, right? How are migrants to the US different from migrants to those who stay at home, for instance, right? And so these structural differences between the hosts and the destination countries are reflected in the migrant dummy, and that's what we want to look at in a way. Yeah.
Okay, and the next question is about policy implications. You talk about policy implications a little bit more from developed country or advanced country point of view. But what are the policy implications for developing countries? Because if they keep seeing talented people leaving the country and going to US, UK, or other places, and what happens to their science, to their, I guess your paper applies not only to maths, maybe to other fields. And so what will be the implications for these countries, and what are the policy implications most important for government?
Right. Well, I'm not sure I can conclude definitively, right? I think it's an important question. What is that good for the developing countries, for the source countries? I'm tending to think these people might come back later as return migrants. The place where I used to work, Sergia in Prague, was founded by a Czech economist who had moved to the US, and then he came back and he nearly became president of the Czech Republic, apart from also founding Sergia. So the return migrants could have a large impact, and for this you have niche migrants in the first place. Also, if people move, that kind of creates incentive for everybody to accumulate kind of human capital. But at the same time, I think there's also good reasons to improve the capacity of source countries in terms of training and nurturing talent, right? Because in any case, there are some people who will not want to move. And if the people are not able to move for some reasons, like the frontiers are closed over COVID, they have this option to continue locally. And if you nurture the talent better locally, you might be losing less people to migration. So I think my conclusion from a developing country perspective is the value of kind of strengthening local capacity. Yeah.
Next question from Dastan Shukurov. This question is more general, I guess. He's asking what visa types are needed to immigrate to US with the aim of science development. Is there any specific visa type for research and development? And can you give some examples of successful immigrants and how they came to US? So I think these are more general questions, but if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. So actually most high-skilled immigrants who go to the US, they come as students first. And they might do, some people already undergraduate degree, but it could be a master degree or a PhD degree. And so in these, as a student, they would have a F1 visa, which is, at least before Trump, was not difficult to get. And then if the people want to stay in the US, they would transition then to another type of visa. So most people would come on this student visa and actually study in the US. In principle, one might also kind of start in the US right away as a worker, right? And that's not so difficult. That's not so easy to do because then you kind of need an offer of employment for a US employer, would be willing to sponsor H-1B visa. So in principle, somebody could come on a work visa, one of these H-1Bs, but they would need an offer from an American employer. And for people who have no US degrees, that's quite difficult. Maybe in computer science, it might be doable to an extent. So the short answer, most people come as students on student visas, and then they can stay. But actually, maybe, Camille, you should be answering this question, not me. You know more about the US and migration than I do. And then about successful immigrants, there's one that I had on my slides. So he's a guy from India, but I didn't have time to talk about it. He's a guy from India who got a silver medal at the AMO, and he studied, I think, at IIT Bombay, which is a very good institution in India, and then he moved to the US for his master's degree, and he's launched a cloud management, cloud data management company that's about 2,000 employees. And so that's clearly kind of a success story. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. And about the first question, probably I can say something from my own experience. I came to the USA at the end of 1990s as a master's student. After completing my master's, then I went on to do my PhD. So after completing my PhD, I was lucky enough to get a job at the international organization, which gives a G4 visa to live and work in USA. But some others, some other my friends, they got H-1B visa. And first, actually, after completion of the degree, they got actually 1 year optional practical training. After that, they got H-1B visa. But if you are in STEM, science, engineering, technology, and mathematics field, then US gives 3 years OPT visas, which gives you more time to adjust and get the H-1B visa and other benefits of immigration system. So I think this was very interesting presentation and very interesting discussion. Karen, do you have anything to add on the points we discussed here?
No, other than just to say thank you for such an interesting paper. I think it was a good one to present in a forum like this. I think it's a lot to digest, and it's made me interested to read your earlier paper, which I confess I hadn't read.
Yeah, I think we managed time very well. It's almost almost 9 a.m. in DC, 6 p.m. in Tashkent. I don't know what time is in London now. And so in general, we managed time very well. And Patrick, thank you very much for very interesting paper and the presentation, and also managing time very well and answering all of those questions. And Karen, for your very insightful comments and discussion points. And we are very lucky to have this partnership with the University of Westminster, London, and Westminster International University in Tashkent to have this webinar series. And next week we'll have another seminar. And so until then, stay healthy, stay well, and see you next Wednesday. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.